listen into how Prime Minister Narendra Modi has put down the details of how the trade negotiations are now being finalized.
समझौता ग्लोबल जीडीपी के करीब 25% और ग्लोबल ट्रेड के करीब 1/3 हिस्से को रिप्रेजेंट करता है। दुनिया में लोग इसकी चर्चा मदर ऑफ ऑल डील्स के रूप में कर रहे हैं। ये दुनिया की दो बड़ी इकोनॉमीज के बीच तालमेल का एक शानदार उदाहरण बना है। ये समझौता ट्रेड के साथ साथ डेमोक्रेसी और रूल ऑफ लॉ के प्रति हमारे शेयर्ड कमिटमेंट को भी सशक्त करता है।
And now go back to my colleague Chetan Bhutani, who's also live from outside the Hyderabad house to really understand the implications of this bilateral trade between India and EU, especially in terms of Chetan, who is to benefit more, India or EU? Secondly, in terms of the sectors where India is looking at a greater relief when it comes to IT, pharmaceuticals, textile, automobiles, and most importantly, will Indian MSMEs gain greater access, or can they be crowded out by larger European corporations?
Swesha, the biggest beneficiary beyond cars and automobile sector is likely to be the goods trade, because Indian textiles and garments face about 10% duties in the European Union. This would help actually garment manufacturers, exporters to reduce significant amount of duty that could actually empower these traders to export more to the EU. In fact, as my colleague Pranay was pointing out, that government also has to take in account the Make in India initiative and not just give complete and free access to any other country that's coming in. The government, of course, would be keeping in mind that they do not want to completely freeze those sectors and eventually start spoiling and harming the Make in India initiative. So yes, electronics, machinery inputs sourced from Europe, as Pranay was also pointing out, would be one of the biggest beneficiary beyond auto sector. This supports Indian manufacturers who currently bear high import costs. That is also likely to be benefiting. But, Swesha, one important factor that we should take into account for our viewers is, of course, how the EU would be treating its carbon rule and industry cost. Remember, the CBAM, which is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, is one of the most critical and the most contentious factor that has been discussed with India and EU. Of course, globally, the CBAM actually disallows and discourages exports to the EU when it comes to industries who are actually polluting, be it iron ore, be it cement, be it steel. So India exports significant amount of aluminium, steel and iron ore to the EU, and that is also likely to be taxed under the CBAM rule, which also would be a lot of discouragement to the exporters. But yes, we never know. Once we actually have the fine print of the trade deal, we would know how the big CBAM issue has been taken care of by the government and the EU under the FTA. Well, India has been actually pushing for longer transition timelines and flexible requirements. But yes, the government, but EU has also been very rigid upon protecting its interest under the CBAM. The compliance cost for steel sector could be increased by 3% to 8% depending on the product's emission footprint. This is a burden that could actually last on the industry that might to bear, because the government won't really do some hand holding here. So yes, some CBAM related issues would be coming up in the FTA, but yes, beyond that, we would be expecting 90% of the industry to actually have an open and free trade access to the EU, and subsequently for India as well, we would have access to their market. So it's a win-win situation for all, and as everybody is calling it the mother of all trade deals, it would actually be a lot beneficial. But yes, we'll have to wait until the fine print and the blueprint of the deal really comes out.
Oh yes, absolutely, and we are waiting for that. But as we are reading into every detail, let's also break down, I beg your pardon, the sector-wise impact of this FTA, the largest exports that have happened to EU, especially in the year 2024-2025. So when we talk about refined petrol, it is stands at 15%, electronic goods that stand at 11.3%, textiles and apparels that stand at 7.6%, organic chemicals at 5.1%, computers, machinery at 5%, iron and steel at 4.9%, pharma at 3.3%, gems, jewelry at 2.5%, and the auto sector at 2.2%. So this really entails how exports to the EU have happened in the year 2024-2025. Now, let's also talk about the largest imports from EU. This is again in 2024-2025. And let's say that in computers and machinery, when we are talking about the largest imports from EU, that has been at $13 billion, electronics at $9.4 billion, aircrafts at $6.3 billion, medical devices at $3.8 billion, gems and jewelry at $3.5 billion. So that is how it amounts to as far as the year 2024-25 is concerned. But of course, looking at the finalization of this bilateral agreement, remember, it has taken more than 15 years for the FTA to now reach a state of conclusion, and the very reason that it is called being the mother of all deals. US going ballistic over India and EU finalizing this trade deal. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said that EU is funding war against themselves. He's accused European buyers of indirectly funding the Russia-Ukraine war by purchasing oil products refined in India from Russian crude, even as the US targeted New Delhi with tariffs. Speaking to the US media, Bessent defended Trump administration's decision to impose steep tariffs on Indian goods, arguing that European governments are undermining their own security stance through continued energy trade. Bessent's remarks that come as New Delhi and Brussels are set to formally announce the conclusion of these negotiations on a comprehensive free trade agreement at a high-level summit that is underway today.
The U.S. has made much bigger sacrifices than the Europeans have. We have put 25% tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. Guess what happened last week? The Europeans signed a trade deal with India.
And remember, while the press statement that is expected at about 1:30, a detailed press briefing that will happen at 4:30 this afternoon. But why really is India hoping for this trade deal to come about with Europe, and what is it that Europe faces today? Trump bullying, of course, that becomes one of the hugest factors. Unpredictable US policies that strain transatlantic trust and long-term planning. Europe faces pressure to align without guarantees of consistency. That becomes a problem for both sides. Russian aggression, then again, as Russia's actions threaten European security and energy stability. An ongoing conflict that is forcing Europe to rethink defense and alliances. Chinese coercion, as China is using economic leverage to influence political decisions. Europe risking dependency without diversified partners. And what is it that India gains out of this? What is it that India is also offering? The vision of stability under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, strong governance, clear foreign policy, giving India strategic predictability, this stability that reassures long-term European cooperation. Steadily growing market, India's economy that continues to expand despite global slowdowns, European businesses that gain access to sustained growth opportunities. A massive consumer base that this is set to create, India's young, expanding population that drives long-term demand, and it offers Europe scale that fewer markets can match.